Hello and welcome to my PEX showcase. So my name's Cheyne Moodley. I'm a third year student, um, major of HP and a minor of geography. My student number is 09687955. I'm in Wednesday mornings, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. tutorial, and my tutors are Danielle and Elizabeth. All right, so I attended Narangba Valley State High School. It's a year 7 to 12 metropolitan co-educational state school under the jurisdiction of Education Queensland. There were over 2,000 students. It's a very organised school, with a variety of curricular activities on offer. However, I only taught HB classes, so I had year 8s, year 10s, and year 11s. Very enjoyable time for myself, and I definitely learned a lot. All right, so for this assessment, I chose the year 8 HPE class. Obviously, we're in term 2. There are 2 lessons per week. One's a theory and one's a prac. And the unit focus was around fitness and training programs with basketball. All right, so the class of 26 students, all with mixed abilities. There were no A students. Majority was C and B achievements in term 1. There were a few D students as well. Only a few students had access to laptops and tablets, as it was a BYO school, which obviously impacted the strategies and learning experience for the students. All right, so the learning intention. This content descriptor is taken straight out of the Australian curriculum, and the focus was designing, implementing, and evaluating personalised plans for improving or maintaining their own and others' physical activity and fitness. So the learning intention was to understand aerobic and anaerobic exercise and the differences between the two. This was important because aerobic and anaerobic exercise underpins the whole unit focus around fitness levels and exercise intensity. So it was important that students understand aerobic and anaerobic exercise, obviously when planning their fitness plans. So this is pretty cool. I actually had access to the results from term 1, and this impacted the learning intention and experience for students. There were no A students. 43% were B students. Over half the class were C students, and there was 4% with Ds. So with having over half the class as C students meant that these kids really needed to be pushed along, made sure that they understood the content before moving on. So obviously with this topic, it was introducing new content. So the big thing is to keep things simple. Now the learning intention are black and white terms, meaning that they're easily defined. There's a right and wrong answer. So this ties in perfectly with level 1 of Mazzano and Kendall's 2007 Taxonomy of Educational Objectives Framework. And as I said, that focus is simply on knowledge retention, which is level 1 of that model. We can apply that understanding later. The decision was made that we should scaffold the learning by teacher modeling through Pearson and Gallagher's gradual release responsibility method. So this is the I do, we do, you do. Now the reasoning is that with this class, you can't initially place all the learning responsibility on the students and expect them to apply the knowledge without teacher support. So it was important that we release the responsibility gradually throughout the learning experience, as emphasized by I do, we do, you do. All right, so this led on to our diagnostic assessment, which was a 5-minute multiple choice quiz done at the beginning before the teaching of the learning experience. Done under exam conditions. Each student had a quiz paper to complete. There were 6 questions covering exercise intensity, heart rate, and the aerobic and anaerobic systems. Students then swapped the papers with elbow partners, and we marked the quiz as a class. I went through the answers by actually questioning students, obviously in an effective way to gauge what students had down. And this was done through calling out students at random to read out what they had down. asking them to justify it, and then even asking the class if they agreed or disagreed with their answer. I then collected the quizzes, analysed the data prior to the next lesson, and then highlighted those misconceptions and obviously gave the correct feedback. So on the left, this is just an example here. This particular student got 4 out of 6. Got question 3 and question 6 wrong. So this is what the data told us, and I actually went through this with the class at the beginning of the next lesson, and also presented the feedback in that table at the bottom of the slide there on Excel. This was actually really interesting personally, just to see what the results showed and the relationships that were found. Questions 1 and 2 basically showed that the students understood that the students understood the relationship between exercise intensity and heart rate. Now these are straightforward. Question 3, only 44% got that one correct, and this was simply not knowing a term, so not knowing what VO2 max is. And then question 5 was a true and false question. So this is pretty interesting. All but 2 got this one correct. They understand that aerobic improves cardiovascular endurance. However, 95% got question 6 wrong, which aligns with question 5. So I asked the students there if they were guessing during the class, and got some mixed responses there. Question 6, again, only 1 student got this one correct. So this was a big misconception that aerobic requires a higher training intensity than anaerobic. But overall, we can see that based on the results, the students need to understand the differences between aerobic and anaerobic systems. So that ties into question 4, 5, and 6. Now, this is expected as this was new content to all the students. And then what I just said was literally taken out that bottom table, the feedback table, which I showed to the class and went through, which was important on how we move forward as a class. All right, so this leads on to the learning experience. So this is the I do section. So basically I went through the PowerPoint slide, highlighting the features and differences of the 2 exercise systems. So on the left, that's literally the slide taken out of the lesson that I actually taught. As you can see, the clearly defined, clear examples and all the main differences that students need to be aware of. So students copied the table down whilst I was explaining how the systems applied in using real life physical examples, so such as sprinting and jogging. We also watched a YouTube clip explaining the systems. So a quick formative response strategy I used, as proposed by Dylan William, was a thumbs up if you understand and then thumbs down if you are confused strategy. Now this quickly gauges where students were at. Majority showed their thumbs up. For those confused, I approached them individually during a group activity further on in the lesson. There's just some evidence of student learning. So we got the lesson objective clearly written down at the top there, at the beginning of the lesson. And then further down at the bottom of the page is where the student outlined aerobic exercise. So clear definitions, clear features, and obviously important for that knowledge retention that we're after. Again, this is just features of the anaerobic exercise, so the other system of focus for the intention. Again, clear features of what defines anaerobic exercise. Next learning experience was another formative strategy. So this was the we do section. So at the start of the next theory lesson, we did a class brainstorming activity, so obviously around aerobic and anaerobic systems. So as a class, I guided the brainstorm along with question strategies. So as William suggests, there are only 2 good reasons to ask questions in class: to cause thinking and to provide information for the teacher about what to do next. This also aligns with the questioning strategy 7 there of the Victorian Department of Education's high impact teaching strategies framework. So that framework gave good suggestions to effective questioning So the examples I used were statements that require a thoughtful response. So do we agree that jogging is a form of aerobic exercise? Why? And then question shells. So why is sprinting an example of an anaerobic activity? So I asked students at random to answer these, and then obviously asked if the class agreed with that particular response. I then did a quick confidence rating. So this was just a show of hands to show if the students understood the difference between aerobic and anaerobic. Now, funnily, everyone responded with their hands up. So I don't know if they're finding it boring. But obviously the picture on the left just shows the evidence of what we achieved during that brainstorming session. And they did highlight the main differences, which was good, was really good. Obviously I helped out quite a bit there by guiding the learning on, as we suggest. Again, evidence of student learning. So this student had the feedback written down from the diagnostic data analysis, which was understanding the difference between the two systems. And then the class brainstorming activity, which is in response to the feedback. So nice, clear, neat work, and obviously clear definitions on the features of each system to differentiate the two. So next learning experience was applying the knowledge. So this was applied in a practical environment for students to experience aerobic and anaerobic exercise. So the goal was for students to make the links to the differences between the two systems by physically experiencing how the systems affect heart rate. So the sheet on the left was a worksheet that was given out to each student. They obviously had to complete the two activities and then take their heart rate down at different intervals, and then obviously make comparisons. For the two systems, the heart rates should differ, which was a big take-home message there. So hopefully by applying this, they're able to, again, make that link through experience. Now this led on to the final formative assessment strategy. So students completed another quiz which linked back to that first diagnostic piece. Now this was to gauge if improvement occurred in their understanding. So this time there were 4 questions instead of 6, and 3 multiple choice questions were on the quiz, and they were the same questions from the diagnostic test. And these were the ones that raised the misconceptions and what's the questions that students struggle the most with. So there's questions 3, 4, and 6. And then question 4 on the formative requires students to elaborate on their retained knowledge by stating those differences in their own words. So this is the EUB section where there's no assistance from myself as a teacher. The quiz was completed in exam conditions at the start of lesson 4, after the learning experience from the 3 previous lessons. I then reviewed each quiz and provided written feedback to the students. All right, so we've got some examples here, and this is to showcase the evidence of impact. The piece on the left is a diagnostic test, and then the formative test is on the right, and this is the same student. All right, so obviously there's a misconception there on what defines aerobic and anaerobic systems in the diagnostic. Question 3 in question 6 were the questions she got wrong. But then the form shows that there's clear growth. As you can see, she clearly got the first 3 multiple choice questions right. She fixed those errors, and then there's clear growth in her response as well. She has a detailed understanding of the differences, and they're justified in question 4. Obviously, in red there on the right, I had some feedback for her. I had some feedback which is based around Hattie's model of feedback, which is basically giving feedback for learners to move forward with or feed forward. So in red there, I outlined the student's next step in the process in responding to the feedback, and then obviously that was based around improving her answer. So I left it as like an open-ended question just for her to sort of think about how she could improve that answer. So I obviously stated that she clearly understands the differences, but what would have reinforced it even further? Maybe an example, perhaps. Again, so this is just more data analysis, progress tracking and data comparison, obviously reinforced by Dylan Williams again. He says progress tracking is an important factor of embedding assessment, because it enables teachers to gauge where the learning is at and see where the improvements are. And what we can see, which is really good, on the right we got the formative test analysis, and on the left is the diagnostic test analysis. We can see a lot more green on the right there, which showcases clear growth. So question 3 on the diagnostic test is the same question as question 1 on the formative test, and we had 82% get that right as opposed to 44%, which was really good. Question 4, 56% for the diagnostic test, and then that represents question 2 on the formative. We had 64, so a slight improvement, which was pretty interesting. And then obviously question 3 was significant. So we only had one student get that one correct, and then over half the kids got that one correct the second time round, with 59%. Again, there was only 18 students who did the diagnostic test, as opposed to 22 students, so data is a bit skewed there. But we can see improvement across the board. Yeah, so every question improved, and then obviously the results on average improved or increased. So this, it shows clear growth, which is what we wanted to achieve. The next step would actually be to follow up with the students who still have those misconceptions, to make sure that they understand what's going on and what the topic is about. Just briefly, some improvements for my future PEX. So I would have liked to experiment more with other assessment strategies and branched away from the traditional quiz. So utilising technological platforms, so Kahoot, Padlet, Clickers would have just been probably more engaging, more interesting for the kids, and obviously differentiation is a big focus there as well. I would have liked to self and peer assess. So obviously getting students to assess their own work, it's a good habits for them, and this can be done through proficiency scales. This would have been pretty interesting to see what would happen. Using diagnostic and formative assessment often and provide timely feedback. So definitely a big focus for next PEX, having this knowledge about the value of assessment would be good for future practice. And then from this experience, I didn't have time to catch up with the students who still had those continuing misconceptions after the final formative assessment piece. I would have liked to, just to make sure that they understood the differences before I left the school. Before I left the school. And then those are my references. And yeah, thank you for listening. And hope you guys have a good uni holidays.